How should we as Christians treat relatives that are not so loving and nice and don't have very good behavior? I got a little bit more background on this, and these family members are local, and it's just a scenario where they're lost and they ask a lot of a Christian family and yet show no gratitude. It's more of an entitled scenario. And let me just say first and foremost that I am not super comfortable with this answer, but I believe it's biblical. And I prayed and I asked God, I had a verse in mind that I knew, but I wanted the context of it. And I said, God, can you just lead me to something scriptural so that I don't just give my own insight or gut reaction? And he pointed me to Matthew 5. And as I was reading through it, I remember how a little bit ago, this hair is driving me crazy. A little bit ago, somebody asked me about is pornography adultery? And God again led me to Matthew chapter 5. And as I read through the whole chapter, this is the Sermon on the Mount, and I thought about how people try to dispensationalize or dispensational away these verses, but if you look through, they are just truthfully God's moral code. Has nothing particularly to do with salvation. The only thing it has to do with is the kingdom of heaven, but the study of the kingdom of heaven it's not a clear cut scenario. So I believe that if you look through Matthew 5 and 6, it does apply to all of us. In the first verse, there are two parts to this, but I just want to point out that Matthew 5:7, first thing he says is, blessed are those that are merciful. And not giving somebody what they deserve. I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. They deserve it. They need to know what they've been doing. And then he pointed out, a soft answer turneth away wrath. And you just have to keep going through Matthew 5, and it says 5:8, be pure in heart. And I think that this is to this question, what submission is to the Christian walk, and the answer of being subject one to another and submitting yourselves one to another in love. Because your motivation is what is going to determine whether you're doing this and becoming resentful and bitter, or you're doing it with joy as a service to the Lord. And I can't say just to be pure in heart and to know why you're doing this. Are you doing it out of fear of conflict, or are you being merciful, like I said, because it's pleasing to the Lord? And then verse 9, be a peacemaker. It's always good to be gentle unto all men and to try to communicate to somebody what you would appreciate. It's not wrong to have boundaries and say, I would really appreciate it if when you came to me, that you would be respectful of whatever it is that you feel is best suited to serving the Lord in your life, in your ministry. For instance, some people say your family is your first ministry. And so you need to be careful of that, because without a family, your ministry in general is going to be cast down and useless. And I just think it's important to remember that being a peacemaker is just part of Matthew 5:9, and to be gentle in how you communicate and seek peace and resolution. But then as you go through verse 38 through 48, Jesus says, resist not evil. And earlier it says we are the salt of the earth. And this is the part where I really struggle. Because in Proverbs 14, it might be verse 9, it says that, go from the presence of the fool when thou perceivest not in him the lips of knowledge. God doesn't necessarily say we need to be hanging around people who are hurtful or toxic. And I covered that in a different question and answer about toxic people. You don't need to be their best friend. You don't need to keep inviting them into your home. You can go from their presence. But at the same time, we need to be willing to meet their needs. And this is so against everything we're taught in our culture. That I'm just going to keep reading. Resist not evil. Verse 44, love them, bless them, do good to them, pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. And then I think verse 46 is the center of this whole thing. If you love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the publicans do the same? Verse 47. And then continues along that lines. And then verse 48, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which in heaven is perfect. And then in Proverbs 3:27 and 28 talks about withhold not good from them to whom it is due when it is in the power of thine hand to do it. And verse 28 talks about, if somebody comes and asks for bread and you have it with you and you can give it, don't just say, oh, come back tomorrow. And the answer is esteeming others better than ourselves. I am not great at this in regards to people who I feel are entitled and demanding, especially if it's a Christian. It's easier sometimes to serve the lost than it is to serve the Christian who shows the characteristics of the lost. But what a light we are. I'm going to cry. Because it's hard. And I empathize with anybody. But it just seems that the darker the world is, the more we're going to be called to give. And that is what makes us salty. It's not just separation from evil and sin, but it's doing good where nobody else will.